Welcome to episode 13 of Paying Firewalls.com podcast. A bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including top products, the latest trends, news, expert tips, and interviews with top security industry company representatives. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Hey there.
Hey, Andrew. As we dive into a different featured topic each episode. New editions of the podcast come out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite platform to get the latest one. And feel free to leave a comment or email us at podcast@firewalls.com with feedback or questions. As always, thanks for listening. And now let's jump right into our featured topic and welcome our guest for this episode.
We've talked about the cloud before, and honestly, how can you not mention it at this stage? Chances are, if you use a computer, you're using multiple cloud applications. And multiple doesn't mean just 2 or 3. As of last year, the average person used 36 cloud-based services on any given day. We quickly went from somewhat jokingly referring to the mysterious cloud a few years ago to more than 80% of business workloads running on a cloud-hosted service today. It's not so mysterious anymore.
It's not. And one of the more popular cloud applications is Microsoft Office 365 with over 200 million monthly active users. Office 365 apps include such staples as Outlook, Exchange, Excel, Word, and more. And since we focus on cybersecurity here at Ping, we thought we'd bring in an expert to talk about a particular continually growing threat to Office 365, spear phishing. What is it, and what can you do to protect yourself? To find out, we welcome Matt Brennan, SonicWall's Vice President of U.S. West Sales. Matt, thanks very much for joining us.
You bet. Glad to be here, guys.
Thanks. And so before we dive into the actual topic, tell us a little bit about what you do at SonicWall.
Yeah, so I have sales leadership responsibility for every state west of the Mississippi. Somehow Wisconsin wiggled itself into there, so I guess that would be the outlier. But basically everything west of the Mississippi, which includes 10 territories for us. And I manage the territory account managers, which basically is the team that is specifically focused on the end users. So that could be our current customers and being the face of SonicWall to them, as well as prospects. And then certainly working very closely with the sellers at our partners, right? Being a 100% channel company, it's very important for us that, all of our business goes through partners.
So in a recent blog post, you wrote that businesses these days, both large and small, have gone from barely recognizing cyber threats as an issue to now very seriously considering the consequences of a breach. Is this a positive attitude change? Or are you optimistic about this?
I am optimistic about it. I believe that the good majority, and I can't tell you exactly what that number is, but based on conversations that I have out in the field, I'd say for every 10 companies that I meet with, 7 of them generally start our conversations with their concern around cyber threats, right? And how they can avoid the challenges around their brand if they were to be breached, right? The cost to the organization around a breach, and frankly, if they can survive, right? And depending on the size of the organization, many of these breaches cost, millions of dollars, and some companies don't have that kind of money available at their discretion to offset that. So it certainly is a big concern of theirs, and I do believe it is a positive change in the market.
And just from your experience, you do mention that, before people didn't take it as seriously. So how have you seen that attitude evolve over the years?
I think it's a matter of the media, certainly, but it's gone from the Home Depot, Target, Ashley Madison, super large companies that have been impacted to, we're seeing a lot of the targeted threats, guys, going after SMB and kind of the smaller enterprise companies. So the companies now that are on the smaller end have seen peers of theirs or have read articles about it not just being the big companies, which in my mind has really kind of transitioned their concerns, right? To feeling like they're vulnerable. And that could be a small, let's say, florist with 10 locations, or a law firm with 4 or 5 locations. There's not a company now that isn't susceptible and isn't being targeted in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so this discussion of business attitudes changing was sort of the preamble to the main thrust of your post, where you talked about a threat that you say you see on a daily basis, which is spear phishing attacks. So for those unfamiliar with a spear phishing attack is, can you give us a bit of a background on why it's so dangerous?
Yeah, you bet. So a lot of people probably have heard of phishing, right? Phishing emails, and those are more of a wide net that gets cast to try to get the end user to do something or act on a particular link or respond to an email. Spear phishing, though, is much more targeted, right? And it's generally targeted towards a specific individual, and it's really intended to steal data for, a malicious purpose. And in many instances, it's also intended to install malware, right, on a targeted user's computer. So I would say the spear phishing is going after a particular individual or going after a particular organization with a much more tailored and catered message to get them to go after it. And taking it even a step further, guys, something that I didn't mention a lot in the article that I wrote, but is even more impactful is business email compromise, right? Mm-hmm. And that one specifically, I've been hearing a lot about out in the field. So just so you guys, when the audience is clear on what business email compromise is that particular type of spear phishing is specifically conducted to get the recipient to wire money, right? Yeah. And to move tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars to certain accounts or to pay a vendor that they may not know exists. And this could come from a CFO. It could come from a CEO, of course, not the real CEO or CFO, but somebody that's basically been kind of dubbed that person. And I've seen many of these emails in the cadence of the request and how the person speaks. They've in essence gone in and they've created, bogus accounts, and they've looked at how the CEO or CFO communicates with their employees, and they've been able to pose as these attackers. And I was in Los Angeles probably a couple of weeks before the holidays, and we heard of 3 different instances in Southern California within the last 2 weeks of people that were taking advantage in the scam and wired 6 figures in most cases out of the company's accounts.
Wow.
So
that's
pretty scary.
Not insignificant number.
No.
And so really what spear phishing is doing is there's research behind it, and they're relying on the fact that somebody is going to kind of jump at this email based on the content, and what it looks like is the official nature of it. And one of the particular attacks spotlighted in the blog that's affecting Office 365 is the Thallium organization. They were named by Microsoft, creating personalized emails to targets they'd scouted. The only thing that was a little bit off in the emails was they used the letters R and N, lowercase r and N, instead of an M, which looks almost exactly the same if you actually type it out on a screen in Microsoft. Mm-hmm. So how common is it then for people to miss some sort of small detail like that might tip them off when they receive this type of message?
More common than not. And it's funny that you bring this specific example up. I got an email 2 days ago from Xfinity, right? Mm-hmm. And I live in Colorado, and that's my internet service provider. It's also who I use for kind of my streaming TV service. This felt incredibly coincidental because I decided to cancel my streaming service and move to YouTube TV. That's a different conversation, but I had just recently been talking to them, and I received one of the better spear phishing emails that I've seen targeted at myself 24 hours later. And it basically said that someone had logged in to my account from a different location than usual and asked me to log in and give my credentials and change my password. And I got pretty far, put it that way, guys. I was like, well, that's bizarre. And then come to find out, looking at the email, the actual from address had been spoofed, and it would added a couple other words behind the Xfinity. So it's incredibly common, and it's not also just targeted at businesses. Right. Yeah. So it could be, in this case, this was a kind of a B2C type instance, and they look very genuine, right? All the way down to the address of Comcast in Philadelphia at the bottom of it. I mean, it looks incredibly real, right? So it's not uncommon, as I mentioned, for companies of size to do this. Wells Fargo was doing one last year that looked very legitimate. I consistently get them from Chase, even though they're not Chase, right? But if you think about it, if your CEO or your boss was to say to you, hey, Kevin, I need you to pay so-and-so marketing company because we missed the last invoice. Can you get it done? Right. And you would most likely say, yep, got it. And here's what's even crazier. An hour later, they run the chance that you haven't done it yet. And they send another one going, hey, I just talked to the so-and-so vendor. Why haven't you sent the money?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's almost like, oh, okay, I got it. I'll do it now. Right. So it's pretty aggressive.
And you say this is probably the most successful strategy you've seen over the last decade. Do you still stand by that?
I do, in the sense that the amount of money that's being moved and the amount of people that are actually clicking on this and transacting in this scheme is more than I have seen in my 7, 8, 10 years of doing this. In fact, I was just reading this article, so I'll share it with you guys. 1.7 billion with a B was the cost of business email compromise in 2019. In other words, that was the amount of money that was wired out of accounts within the US based on the spear phishing business email compromise. And that's a ton of money.
Yeah,
right?
It's an entire industry.
Yeah, it's insane. So it's meaningful, right? I mean, you'd think back in the day of, you'd have DDoS attacks, you'd have, people take down companies, you'd have, brute force attacks. I mean, that's all a thing, right? But the cost would be maybe your network's down for a couple hours, right? Or maybe your website, if you're an e-tailer, is down for a day. I mean, that is real money, right? But those don't happen every day, every week, right? The email compromise, the business email compromise, and the spear phishing attacks are happening very, very often.
And it only takes one in each organization to cause major problems.
Correct.
So
Correct. Yep.
You've already talked about a couple of specific situations. You mentioned a couple of spear phishing campaigns in California towards the end of last year. But over the years, following this type of a network breach and specifically a situation where maybe organization has specifically lost money, what's the mood in the room, and what are some other horror stories that maybe you've heard while speaking to people who have just been breached?
Yeah, so I've been pretty fortunate over the years, being a part of a managed security service provider and seeing, a lot of different attacks and a lot of different breaches. Knock on wood, none of those were our customers, which was great, or at least the way in which the bad actor was able to access the network was not through either a piece of software hardware that we sold and or a company that we were managing. That being said, probably the worst story that I've been a part of happened right around October-ish last year. And I was out in the field with one of my salespeople, and we have a customer that uses SonicWall firewalls, right? But the way that the intruder or the bad actor got in this case, was via email, just as we've been talking about, via Office 365, right? So this is about a 70-something location clothing store that has presence nationally. And the bad actor came in, got access via a phishing campaign or spear phishing campaign, got the user's credentials, no different than that Xfinity example I gave you guys, where I type in my username and I type in my password and off they go, right? Well, that person or that attack was able to get into the admin credentials within Office 365, which then gave him access to the whole network. And what they inevitably ended up doing is they shut down the POS at all 70 of their stores nationally for 10 days, guys.
Wow,
10 days,
lots of money.
right before Thanksgiving. This retailer was literally taking transactions, and I don't know how old you guys are, but maybe old enough to remember the old days where when you went to the store to buy something, you put your credit card on this machine and then they put this piece of paper with the carbon copy and they ran it over it, right? And it took an imprint of the card. They resurrected that system, right? But I can tell you right now, based on what we learned sitting in there, people weren't really interested in buying clothes that way, right? So it was really morbid. We walked in, they were on day 9 post-breach. The overall energy in the office was horrific. There was auditors flying around. There was kind of the post-breach remediation teams that were brought in. And the IT director said that in the last 9 days, he felt like he slept a total of 2 nights.
Wow.
Right? I have not seen that hit the news. They did a pretty good job of keeping it under wraps. I don't know how, right? But the entire IT staff, and when I mean the entire IT staff from the CIO down, is no longer employed there. Their entire IT and IT security has been outsourced as of now, and they've ripped and replaced the vendors that they had been using for email security and endpoint security, and now are with different folks. So that was probably the most horrific kind of hands-on situation that I've had, and knock on wood, thank goodness it wasn't our products or our services. But I really felt for the people in the organization, and I don't know if they'll be able to recover.
Oof. That's a scary story.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, it is.
Well, speaking of people, we know human error tends to be the easiest way into any organization, really. And so, you know, training, raising awareness for users is obviously a great way to stop spear phishing, but we know it's going to keep happening. So what else is there out to stop this?
You know, there's certain technologies that help, right? In fact, you know, a little bit of plug for SonicWall, our cloud application security product specifically has a lot of security measures built in to detect and hopefully prevent spear phishing attempts, right? One of the companies that I mentioned in Southern California, post that incident, actually was in the process of doing a proof of concept on that product. And we caught 2 or 3 instances of spear phishing that arguably their previous vendor did not catch or would not have caught. So technology can be helpful, and a lot of that is based on machine learning and habits, right? Specifically in our product, the cloud app security product. The first 5 days, guys, all it does is scan the inboxes or the outboxes, the whole mailbox, right, of the users. And it looks to see trends and communication and who you send emails to most commonly, right? And it gets kind of behavioral analytics, or a fingerprint for that matter, of the user behavior. So let me give you an example. Let's just say, Kevin, that you constantly are emailing back and forth with your boss, right? Or maybe people you manage. Mm-hmm. Well, your CFO never emails you, right? Personally, my CFO, I've maybe got 2 emails from him in 2 years, right? Yeah. So if my CFO was to send me an email asking me to wire money, that would be a behavior that would flag the system and would prevent that email from reaching you, or from reaching me in this example, right? Mm-hmm. So it looks at behavioral analytics, and that's a big part of it. So that helps, but it is very common for the human error, right? And that's something that's hard to protect against. We do internal cyber security training. I highly suggest that companies out there do that. We have partners of ours that have the ability to do phishing campaigns, spear phishing campaigns. They will leave USB drives randomly in the lunchroom or maybe in the parking lot, and people pick them up, and it's pretty outrageous. Still, I believe the last study was 35% of people, when they find a USB drive, they plug it in. Right? So, so you better have a darn good antivirus endpoint type product to ward against that as well. So I think, guys, and I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit here, but training for your employees, very, very important. Having a layered security approach, solid endpoint client, having a solid email security product, those 3 things, can't be understated, because the attackers continue to get better. And unfortunately, there's a lack of security engineering talent out there. So there's this gap as it were, between, the amount of evasions and the amount of people that can actually help prevent these. So that's why things like machine learning and AI become so critically important.
And we've talked about Office 365, but cloud app security isn't just Office 365 app security. So people who use multiple cloud services, other applications, what are some other things that they get out of having cloud app security in their setup?
Great question. So cloud application security is specifically designed to protect one of two cloud-based services. The first one would be Office 365. And it's not just the email component. You're exactly right. It also protects OneDrive. It protects SharePoint. It protects, the other documents, as it were, within the Office suite. So when I'm talking to folks out in the field, customers, it has got fantastic email security that is a part of it, but it's not just email security. It is also protecting the suite of other cloud applications within kind of Office 365 and or G Suite, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're a G Suite user and you're uploading files into Google Drive, it provides security around that. It has DLP, data loss protection. The other thing that it has is credential compromise, right? Which is a big thing, as you guys are all aware of, around accessibility. So not only does it have the G Suite and the Microsoft 365, Office 365, but it also has access to a couple other applications, for example, Box and Dropbox, right? So let's say, hypothetically speaking, that I was able to steal your credentials to Box.com. Well, many people use the same exact password for every single thing. So the likelihood is whatever password I use for Box or Dropbox is probably the same password I use for Office 365, right? Yeah. So it would detect that as well and notice that, there's credential compromise amongst cloud applications. So that's a big, big thing. And right now, that is probably our most talked about and most highly adopted product that we have.
So Firewalls.com, obviously a big point of our focus is on the firewall, of course, as the cornerstone of network setup. So how does cloud app security integrate with like the SonicWall TC, NSA, and even the NSV virtual firewalls?
Yeah, good question. So back to what I said a couple minutes ago, it is this layered security notion, right, guys? So I think last year, and then this is not the exact stat, but I think still around greater than 80% of our overall business was firewalls. And I would argue that's probably similar for you guys, right? Mm-hmm. So that's important. It's incredibly important. But at the same time, having the email security, in this case, the cloud app security, is of the utmost importance as well, right? So having the firewall, I would highly suggest endpoint as well, and then having the cloud application security all integrated. When I say integrated, this goes back to my message a minute or so ago about how organizations can't afford to continue to hire and maintain security professionals, right? It's very costly and there's not enough of them. So if there's a way for me as an organization to have a single management tool or a single pane of glass to manage multiple security products, the better off I'm going to be. So when you talk about integration of firewalls with these other products, the thing that I hear the most of and what I love to see is we have two really management applications. We have GMS and we have CSC, Capture Security Center. And if I log into, say, Capture Security Center, I can manage my firewalls. I can manage my cloud application security. I can manage my endpoint security, which we call Capture Client. I can manage my wireless APs, right? So right there's a huge efficiency and a huge ROI on not having to log into 3 or 4 different applications or management tools on a daily basis and have to learn the various differences, right? So that's a big goal for us now and should be something that you guys talk about, in my opinion, is SonicWall becoming a network security company, not just a firewall company.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the small business side of things. You mentioned not only it's expensive to hire IT staff, so sometimes a small business just can't afford to staff somebody, but we also have seen a lot of stories, in the last few years about just the complete lack of qualified individuals to take those roles in the first place. So having something like a centralized management capability, how helpful has that been to maybe some small business owners who feel fairly tech savvy, but they're not IT folks?
Yeah, so it's been very well adopted, and it's a pretty intuitive user interface. It feels a lot kind of like an iPhone in the sense that you have these tiles, and each one of the different products has a tile. So it's pretty straightforward if I log into it. If I own the firewall, well, that button's obviously lit up, and I can click on it and manage the firewalls and policies and things of that nature. Then I could go back out and click on the cloud application security tile, and then I could click on the capture client tile, the wireless, et cetera, right? So the feedback has been well received from our customers and our partners, mainly around, as I mentioned, the fact that if I'm a security engineer and I'm managing a network, well, if I have to log into one vendor's for endpoint, right? And then I have to spin up another application for email security. And then I have to have another portal for firewalls. And I have to have another one for wireless, and on I go. It just, there's not a lot of correlation, right? There's not a lot of efficiency between those various products, and it makes things more challenging, more difficult. And then obviously it's harder to find engineers that have that kind of breadth of training and capabilities around 4 or 5 different product sets.
So we've definitely focused on the spear phishing aspect of cloud app security. Is this also good for securing against other major threats that we hear about on a daily basis? Stuff like 0 days, ransomware, the really big ones of 2019.
Yeah, so it's a component of it, right? But 0 days are a tough one. And when I say 0 days, I like to use the terminology, guys, of previously unseen, right? 0 days, that is basically insinuating that there's a type of malware or a type of ransomware or an attack that's never, ever, ever been seen before, right? Those aren't that common, okay? What is very common is previously unseen or previously unknown. And what that insinuates is the way in which, let's say, the malicious content was packaged. So you could say, hey, I know what this malware looks like, and it kind of smells like malware, looks like malware, but the way that it was delivered to the end user is different than it's been seen before. So previously unseen, right? So in that instance, again, another tout here for SonicWall, every one of our products has the ability to run our Capture ATP service, right? Some folks call it Advanced Gateway Security Suite, one and the same. But the difference in what we do, guys, versus any of our competitors is we have 3 different sandboxing technologies, right? So when we send any information, whether it comes through cloud application security, whether it comes through our firewalls, whether it comes through Capture Client, as long as the end user or the MSP or partner has subscribed to our Capture ATP services, we are able to detect previously unseen, like I said, malware, ransomware, et cetera, and we send it through our 3 sandboxing technologies. So, hypervisor, emulation, virtualization, and we're looking at about 1,200 files a day that have previously unknown, right? Because we already know the known. Right? The known, we go, oh yeah, got it. That's just, we've seen that before, and we pass it through. But we pass about 1,200 files a day through those 3 different sandboxes. And that's a lot, right? I mean, albeit we have 1 million different firewalls, 1.1 million that are phoning home on a daily basis, or I should say endpoints. So, 10%, give or take. But then the real test, guys, is our RTDMI technology. And I don't want to go down a huge rabbit hole here, but this is our patent pending real-time deep memory inspection. And this takes it even a step further. So this isn't actually sandboxing. It's a 4th engine. And if something goes through the sandbox and we're still unclear as to kind of what's going on, we send it through RTDMI. And of those files, 422 of those, we have blocked, right, a day with the RTDMI technology. And what's unique about that is it's actually detecting malware in Office documents and PDFs, right? So the threat landscape has changed over the course of the last couple of years in the sense that, most of the attackers were forcing everything. All the attacks were going through HTTP, HTTPS, and kudos to Firefox and Safari and Google Chrome and Internet Explorer. The security measures that they've put in place, that's not as common of an attack vector. What is the most common attack vector, or the most common right now, I would say, is we're seeing a lot of this malware obfuscated in PDFs and Word documents. And RTDMI is able to detect it. It's able to force it to basically detonate. And then once it's detonated, if we go, okay, I guess it really isn't bad, then, boom, reassembled and off it goes to you. If it is bad, we block it, right? And you're never going to see it. And all of that I just described on average happens in under 2 seconds.
Wow.
So that's, in my opinion, it's more about kind of what we're doing around our Capture ATP, Capture Labs, sandboxing, and RTDMI, and the fact that all of our products have the ability to have that versus a point product that is just looking at email security, for example.
Yep.
So, fair enough?
Fair enough. All right, great. Thanks very much for joining us, man. We really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
And now it's time for headlines. Every episode, we discuss a few top news stories in the network security world and what they may mean to you. So we'll jump right into headline number 1. Emotet malware now hacks nearby Wi-Fi networks to infect new victims. So our ransomware friend Emotet is back in the news, and you've got to give it credit for creativity. Certainly not just ransomware, but we've heard the name quite a bit again lately.
It's a very versatile one, like you said. We've talked about it a lot. Usually as a sort of guest star for other big name attacks at the time. So, for instance, in our last episode, we talked about social engineering emails being built around the coronavirus news, and that was Emotet as well. Mm-hmm. So this is definitely the sort of attack of 2019, 2020 area.
Yeah, and it's interesting, just jumping around a bit before we get to the actual story here. It's interesting that Emotet was sort of first identified about 6 years ago, and then it seemed to kind of go away, and then all of a sudden last year became in vogue again.
Right when you expected it the least.
Yeah, and so this story is about Emotet being involved in a new attack vector using previously infected devices to identify new victims that are connected to nearby Wi-Fi networks.
Yeah, so this newest strain, and I say new, but it's not quite new. We'll touch on that in a second. But It utilizes a Wi-Fi spreader module that scans nearby Wi-Fi networks and then attempts to infect any that it can connect to.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This story in the Hacker News actually really goes into some depth about how this all occurs. So basically, it can read the infected devices nearby Wi-Fi networks that they could connect to. And then the next step is kind of a brute force attack on all of those Wi-Fi networks, just trying to be able to log in. Mm-hmm. Then if they are able to log in successfully, and of course, a brute force attack is basically they have a couple of lists of passwords and usernames that they'll just keep trying to log in and log in and log in until something happens to work. And I'm sure some of the time it does. So they get in, and then another brute force attack to try and access some of the devices that are connected to the network.
Right. And with these brute force attacks, really the best and only defense is just have a strong password. So long, complex, unique, those are all important. But yeah, like you said, these brute force attacks are checking against a couple of lists of passwords that in this case, this story is in unknown origin. Mm-hmm. And just keeps trying one at a time until something works or they run out of options.
Yeah. And so the scary part of this is you can have a perfectly controlled network environment, never had any kind of an issue. You've got your Wi-Fi network secured, so you think, and you just happen to be located within Wi-Fi range of a previously infected device, and all of a sudden you are at major risk.
Yeah, that could be a guest who just happens to wander through your Wi-Fi, and that's it. If they can crack that password, it's in.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that this is not actually new. Basically, Emotet was never really gone as much as we thought they were.
Yeah, so while this Wi-Fi spreading module was discovered 4 months ago, it did have a timestamp in April of 2018. So it's it's existed for at least a few years.
And reading some articles, basically in the industry, they hadn't seen Emotet out there for a while until about September of last year. So that means this was still going along while people were thinking it was already gone. And so who knows what else is going on that we don't know about.
Yeah, and Emotet's very good at hiding itself. So when it installs itself like this, it'll install the payload in a service.exe file in the Windows Defender System Services folder. So it appears very legitimate and gives you pause if you go to delete it. But it definitely sneaks in.
Yeah, if you are running Microsoft operating system, then you're used to seeing Windows Defender pop up on your screen from time to time and think nothing of it. In fact, you might feel good that it's popping up and defending you against threats. But yeah, this particular Windows Defender System service, it'll actually then communicate with a command and control server and execute Emotet on that infected host. And in these cases, then it's all about extracting data and whatever else is desired at that point.
Yeah, so again, really the only way to defend here is strong Wi-Fi security and strong passwords to go with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fortunately, really, if you do have a strong username, password setup in this situation, I think you should feel pretty safe still, because it is just a couple of lists of username passwords. And if you're unique enough and complicated enough, seems unlikely, at least to me, based on reading this article, that you'd really be at too much risk. But if you have not taken that step, if you just popped on your Wi-Fi,
still have the admin password set originally,
it might be a good time to check those out. These are some real life implications here. Right. All right, on to headline number 2. 500 malicious Chrome extensions impact millions of users. Researchers say 500 Google Chrome browser extensions were found to secretly upload private browsing data to attacker-controlled servers and redirect victims to websites filled with malware. They've since been removed, but the extensions were downloaded millions of times from Google's Chrome web store. So that's a pretty pervasive issue.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with what a browser extension is in this case, this is something used on Google Chrome for customizing your web browser, stuff like blocking ads, managing cookies. The 3 most popular Google extensions are probably ones you recognize, stuff like AdBlock Plus, UOrigin blocking, and I believe Honey and Grammarly are up on that list, as well as Cisco WebEx, among some of the more popular ones out there.
Yep, Honey gives you promo codes for stores that you're on, and kind of ironically, a lot of the extensions that you use are to make your web browsing experience safer. Right. An unpleasant coincidence there. Chrome has about 50% of browser market share in the US, 64% worldwide, with more than 1 billion with a B users. So a lot of people use extensions and a lot of people use Chrome.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I did a little research off to the side. There are approximately 200,000 extensions on the Chrome store, but only 50% of those have more than 15 or 16 downloads. So while there is a lot on the store, a lot of the store is actually pretty empty. So the only extensions that have passed that 10 million mark as far as installs go is, as I mentioned, the AdBlock Plus, Honey, Skype, Grammarly, those real big ones. But most of the store is pretty empty, really.
And the malicious extensions that are being referenced here, a lot of them provide services like the ones that you're talking about. And that's a really important point, I think, that you mentioned about the lack of downloads, because the other note here is that these malicious extensions had almost no ratings on the Chrome web store. So both the number of downloads and the lack of ratings, that should be a red flag for you right away if you're thinking about an extension and there's not too much.
Yeah, you don't want to be the first person to try an extension out for sure.
No.
Almost all of the 500 extensions talked about in this story were found to share a common source code. So this kind of indicates that it is either centrally planned by a single attacker or group of attackers, or maybe that these are just sort of clones being built on top of one another.
Mm-hmm. The bad extensions in this case were part of a term called malvertising campaign. There's always these new mashup phrases out there. I think you can figure out what malvertising is: malware and advertising. And those types of campaigns can be used for a variety of malicious activity, like data exfiltration, phishing, or ad fraud. And as we mentioned in this case, victims were sent to malicious websites instead of legitimate online ads by redirecting users to a command and control server to exfiltrate their data.
Yeah, it gives you pause to think about how common and popular not only these extensions are, but how much information and privacy they really are giving away. So one quote from the article is that what most users don't realize is that extensions have full access to all of the data on a page.
Yeah.
So that includes your email, banking information, credit card numbers, anything you've put on your browser. These extensions are given free access to.
Yeah, the quote refers to extensions as the wild, wild west of the web. And you're basically handing over your trust to the developers of these extensions if you enable them on your browser, because they know what you're up to.
Right. And Google does seem to be taking the threat pretty seriously. Like you said, these 500 Chrome extensions have been removed. Google's done things like add new user data policies and bug bounty programs for people to try to hunt down any violations. So they do seem to be doing their best to clean up the web store.
Yeah, and this particular discovery was of extensions that were first found in January of 2019. Duo Security was the research firm that found about 70 of these malicious extensions. And again, to Google's credit, after those 70 were reported, they found 430 more and took those down as well. So they're not just sitting on them and letting them be out there. And as you mentioned, some new rules in place. The bounty program was interesting as well, to provide some incentive for researchers to help out Google and find other bad actors.
Outsourcing some of this.
The other thing that I thought was a little bit alarming, if you have one of these extensions, they smartly do a good job of mixing real ads with the bad ones. So you might have an ad for a popular store, like I think the article mentioned Macy's, for instance, and then the very next ad could be the one that takes you to a malicious website where all sorts of bad stuff is going to happen to you. So they're not so transparent that it's obvious that you're going to the bad place right away. Now for headline number 3, the 2020 census could be the next big hacking and disinformation target. So the Washington Post's Cybersecurity 202 has a report about a specific concern among lawmakers for this year: hackers targeting the 2020 census. And this will be the first census conducted primarily online, and census takers going out to collect data will be using smartphone apps as well.
Yeah, I think we've learned recently when you mix politics and smartphone apps that you don't always get the best results. You might not get results ever.
Yeah.
You saw in the Iowa caucuses. Yeah, so as you said, this is the first one conducted primarily online. The government is encouraging respondents to submit their census forms over the internet before they go on to the next step of mailing things and sending people to your door. So yeah, there's quite high stakes here.
Yeah, so there's the combination of the potential security issues with the apps and with the online nature of gathering census data. There's also the added concern that, much like recent elections, social media misinformation suggesting maybe that the data is corrupted or rigged may cause some problems with actual participation and things of that nature. Backing up, why is the census so important? It's because that's how congressional districts are drawn and grant funding is distributed. A lot of real life implications for people to participate.
Right. So the census has been on the Government Accountability Office's list of high risk government projects since 2017 due to cybersecurity and other issues, including concerns from the Census Bureau that says they might not be able to hire enough workers to even gather all this data from across the nation.
Yeah, so that's a completely separate issue, but also an important one as well. Sort of also harkens back to the Iowa caucus situation where I think they might not have necessarily had
the manpower behind it.
People there, yeah. But as of December, the Census Bureau still had 191 unfixed high or very high risk cybersecurity problems, with about a quarter of those 2 months or more past their planned fix date, according to the GAO. The report didn't understandably distribute the specific problems. They didn't describe the specific problems because you don't really want to open the door like,
right.
Hey, here are all the problems.
Here are the problems that we may not be able to fix.
Hackers, come on in.
Yeah, apparently the government has been working with private entities as well to beef up security, which they would also not name. So I guess this is now a bit of a race against time to fix these very outstanding bugs and fixes before the census starts, which is April 1st.
Yeah, we're getting there pretty quick. Census Director Stephen Dillingham does say, though, that their systems are monitored around the clock. You mentioned that they noted to have been in touch with top minds in cybersecurity and intelligence, whatever top minds means. And the Census Bureau is also storing data in multiple places in computer clouds and monitoring for disinformation. Of course, this is all just people talking to Congress. And again, they have to be somewhat secretive about their plans here. But it also means that it's not super reassuring either, because you just don't know what's going on.
Yeah, and looking at this from a user, I guess, citizen point of view, there's also some concern to be had with things like phishing, which we talked about in our interview today, as these census forms are coming to emails and different census websites are being launched. I'm sure there will be attackers trying to spoof those sites and lead people astray.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was another piece of this puzzle. The folks in Congress are pressuring social media platforms to be careful about deceptive census-like documents, with even potential legislation offering up some criminal penalties for people who mimic those forms. But yeah, people may see some things online that look like the real deal. And, we just talked about why it's important to fill out your census information. So, they feel their sense of duty, and they think that this is the right thing to do, and hop on to an official looking page. And it turns out they may send their information
to a trap.
Yeah, to the wrong place.
Yeah, I remember there was a bit of an uproar last year. A certain political party had basically put out a fundraising campaign that very much mimicked an official census form. And so there was some uproar there. And I think the spearfishers and fishers of the world will be taking notes.
Yeah, we've talked at length recently about using things that are top of mind in the current times to launch malware campaigns. We just, in our last episode, talked about two different situations, with the coronavirus being used as a malware phishing email type scam. Also, malware being hooked on to popular music from very well-known artists of the time. And so, this is just another one of those things.
The hip new thing, the census.
People will be thinking about it. And so it's certainly there for the taking. And you mentioned Iowa. It's something that I think likely Congress was a little extra concerned about this report, having just witnessed Iowa. We saw some quotes in this particular article to that effect as well. So people are concerned about the technology not being fully ready to handle the move away from paper, which the Census Bureau had still been using up until the last go around.
Yeah, so this time around, everybody, be careful, read your emails carefully, and don't click anything unless you know what it is.
Yep, but make sure you get counted. So
yes,
just make sure that everything is on the up and up. And as always, we talked about the RN being used instead of the M for Microsoft in the spear phishing campaign that we just discussed earlier. Just keep an eye on things, and
don't know how to spell census, please learn. At Firewalls.com, we're fortunate enough to have a team of certified network engineers who offer a variety of services for top security brands like firewall configurations, endpoint deployment, and expert support, to name a few.
This week, our team of experts was a little bit too tied up to drop in for an engineer's minute, but they will be back next time with another tip. So if you do have a question, leave one in the comments or email us at podcast@firewalls.com, and you just may get yours answered in a future episode.
To learn more about what our network engineers can do for your business, give us a call at 866-403-5305. or go to firewalls.com/services.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast. And thanks again to Sonic Wall's Matt Brennan for joining us as well to talk about securing cloud applications and sharing his experiences with security at various businesses around the nation. Check out the links in the description to learn more, as well as our blog, firewalls.com/blog. Subscribe or follow now to ensure you get the latest episodes as soon as they're available. And please do rate and review us wherever you listen to the podcast. Visit firewalls.com for all your network security needs, and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode. But in the meantime, we remind you to
get secure, stay secure.